So, hello. Welcome back to the second episode of the Ripples of History podcast. Today we're joined by my friend Danny.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
And he is, I assume, waving in person.
I'm waving in person.
He's waving in person.
Good evening.
So, alright, so on this one we're going to be following the second phase of the War of the Roses. So, last time we ended in 1461. So, Danny, for the sake of the audience, do you want to give us a quick recap of the things that have led us to this point?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
let's
the
try it then.
quick version. We've had a bad king, Henry VI of the House of Lancaster, mentally ill, etc. But there's another guy called Edward who is not mentally ill, and he's hot, and he's young, and then he also has a good claim to the throne. And his dad pursued the claim, the Duke of York. And basically, here we are after the Battle of Towton. And now Edward has deposed Henry VI, and he is now King Edward IV. And that is basically what we're up to.
So, we have essentially a really incompetent king that has been overthrown. And now we have got a hot young monarch in power. Fuck yeah. England having the time of its life.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's happening in 1461? What's all the rage?
Straight away, Henry VI himself is weak, but his wife isn't. And it just so happens that the north is near Scotland.
Damn.
England and Scotland
actually border one another.
Yeah, I know. And they're
That's
not friends.
Insane.
So Henry's wife, Margaret of Anjou, has the good idea to go to Scotland and say to the people there, can we have some help? You'll get to invade England, and my husband and then my son will get their birthright back.
The favourite Scottish pastime.
Yeah.
Just raids in the north.
Yeah, it sounds like a win-win deal for them.
Yeah.
Really, at the time.
You can always trust on the Scots to help with a bit of succession difficulty down south.
Oh, yes. And at the same time, in the north, the House of Lancaster is still popular. You've got the Earls of Northumberland and their relatives, they still like them. The Dukes of Somerset have land in the north, so they've got solid grounds to invade through Scotland, get a lot of support in the north, and then retake the throne if they want.
So things are heating up.
Yeah, things are not settled yet.
Ooh.
Things are not settled. So, Edward IV responds in kind, and he gets his armies together with the only family he really has supporting him, the Nevilles, the Earl of Warwick. Remember that guy?
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, he starts to do some things now.
He's doing some things.
Yeah,
Ooh.
This episode he's got character development.
His character arc is about to unfold.
He's gonna go crazy. We've got Warwick, his brother John, the Lord Montagu. He comes back now and then. They have a bit of fighting up in the north. And at the same time as they're fighting the Lancastrians, Edward tries to make peace with some of them because he's only really got the Nevilles. He needs more support than that if he wants to
more than just one family.
Yeah, they need other support. So he tries to come to terms with the Duke of Somerset and the Earl of Northumberland's brother Ralph, and he says, if you support me, I'll let you have your lands still, no matter what.
Yeah.
Just let bygones be bygones, we'll move on with our lives.
Quite a smart move.
It is.
If you want to get supporters.
Yeah. Alas, they were very loyal to the Lancastrians, so they did accept, but then rebelled anyway, using their lands. So it wasn't the best strategy, because Edward was like, here's your castle back, you can have it. Don't rebel against me using this castle.
And then they did just that.
Yeah, they did exactly
Who could have foreseen?
Who could have seen it coming?
Who could have seen it coming?
So
not Edward, evidently.
No. It's a good policy. Alas, it didn't work with those two. It had some successes elsewhere, but those two, not great. But it's okay. They got what was coming to them in 1464. Because we have another couple of battles in the north.
Ooh.
The battles of Hedgley Moor first.
Hedgley Moor.
And then Hexham. And between the two of them, Ralph Percy is killed in action, and the Duke of Somerset is captured and executed by the Nevilles.
Jeez. It's like the Battle of the Bastards, except
Yeah.
no
It's
bastards.
No, just the battle.
It's just the battle.
The Battle of
Full
the
stop.
North.
King of the North.
Yeah. Wow. We'll see.
We'll see.
Let's just say, Robb Stark's a good-looking young man and a good military
And we
commander.
knew what happened to him.
Let's just say he has historical inspiration.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that
Yeah.
for the time being. Yes. Yes. Edward finds a wolf.
A dire wolf.
Yeah. Now, we'll come back to this little teaser. Henry VI somehow gets separated from the rest of his group and just sort of spends a year on the run in the north. And then he's eventually captured just by... I think a monk betrayed him and told John Neville where he was.
Well, that's not on,
So they
is it?
captured the king. They captured Henry VI. Yeah.
Imagine being betrayed by a monk.
Yeah.
That's not... You could understand being betrayed by one of your men, but a fucking monk?
Yeah, they're meant to be
grasped on by
nice.
Friar Tuck?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus.
Right, Robin Hood reference. Intriguing. Has someone done his research?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was just thinking of monks.
Well, we'll just keep Robin Hood on the back burners for
Okay.
now. Anyway, 1465. We've had some of the Lancastrians killed. Henry VI is captured, put in the Tower of London. He's kept alive for now, though, because he's still the head of the family. So it's easier for Edward IV to have the head of the Lancasters in prison rather than having him executed and the claim going to his son Edward, who is still in Scotland. So it is just easier politically for him to have Henry alive at the moment
Yeah.
until Edward is dealt with. A young Edward, not Edward IV. Edward of Westminster.
Edward of
That's
Westminster.
the thing, they're all called Edward.
They're
or
all
Richard,
Edward.
Or Henry.
Yeah.
Apart from one guy called George.
Well, that's creative.
Let's introduce him now, because
Okay.
he becomes a big character.
George.
George.
Tell us about George.
This is Edward IV's little brother. Or, well, one of two little brothers at this point. He's the middle brother, now that the other... Yeah. And George, very soon after coming to the throne, Edward makes George the Duke of Clarence.
The Duke of Clarence.
Yes. He makes his other brother, Richard, the Duke of Gloucester. Again, everyone's called Richard. Now, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, doesn't get up to too much in this story, but we'll see a lot of him in the next couple of chapters.
So he is also a returning character.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Ooh.
Big time. If I told you his other name, you'd know who I'm talking about. But we'll keep that a secret.
Ooh.
Oh!
Oh.
Oh!
Ooh.
Yes. And I got George, Duke of Clarence. He's doing alright out of his brother's reign, getting rich, etc.
As you do.
And yeah, and by 1465, things are good for Edward and George and the rest of the Yorkists. You know, he's powerful.
He's got what he
sexy.
wants.
Yeah. There's not really that much opposition
he-
at the moment.
Married at this point? Or is he still kind of...
This is a great question.
Hmm.
Because while John Neville is off fighting Lancastrians in the north, Edward has sent Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, to France to start negotiating a marriage
Ooh.
between either Louis XI's daughter, Anne, or sister-in-law, who's called Bona.
Nice.
Yeah, Bona of Savoy. That's his sister-in-law.
What a name.
Yeah, it's great. What could have been Edward and his Bona? Little did we know Edward and his Bona would lead England into a lot of difficulties.
I bet. I bet.
Because it's a different kind of Bona,
Yeah.
you know? Instead of marrying a French girl or any other foreign girl, such as Isabella of Castile, she tried to get...
And that would
them.
have, I assumed,
That
given
would-
given an alliance perhaps with Castile.
Yeah, and that
Which
would
would
mess
have
things
been-
up big time in Spain
Yeah.
as well. Because then you just wouldn't get Spain.
No, because
But-
they're Aragon and Castile are still separate at this point.
Yeah,
They're still trying to...
but it was her marriage that put
Yeah.
them together. So that was something that happened. There were other options from the Duchy of Burgundy.
Ooh, Burgundy still around.
Burgundy's around, which, if you don't know, is basically bits of eastern and central France.
Yeah.
And the Netherlands, basically.
For some reason, the Netherlands are in there.
Yeah, so it's
European geography at its finest.
Yeah, just a bit of France and pretty much the entire Low Countries, actually, other than, like, the Prince Bishops. There are a few options from there, like Catherine of Bourbon, who was the Duke of Burgundy's niece. She was proposed to Edward a few times, actually, even before he took the throne. But he went a different route. He went for a lovely lady called Elizabeth Woodville, who was a no one.
Oh no, he's gone for the non-morganatic marriage.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yes. He chose a lady friend who didn't make much sense at all. Basically, he married her because she was fit.
Fair enough.
And Edward and his boner caused England a few problems. He'd already had a couple of mistresses by 1464, and he wanted to make Elizabeth a mistress, but she said verbatim, "I'm not going to let you have sex with me unless you marry me."
Bit of a problem there for him.
Yeah, so he thought, you drive a hard bargain.
Yeah.
Let's cast foreign policy aside.
And he actually went for it.
Yeah.
You know what? Fair play.
Mm,
Ignoring the traditions of statesmanship at this point in time.
Yes. Now, there's some ideas going about that it was supposedly a larger part of this reconciliation plan, because Elizabeth Woodville, the Woodville family, had supported the Lancasters.
So this isn't just a random peasant family. It's sort of, would you say, minor nobility?
They're very minor.
Very minor nobility.
Knights.
Right,
Gentry,
okay.
really.
So quite, yeah.
Yeah, they have an inkling of royal blood because Elizabeth's mother was Jacquetta of Luxembourg. She was married to Henry VI's uncle first. Uncle died, and then she married this guy, this knight, Richard Woodville, Elizabeth's father. Strangely enough, there's a similar case of someone marrying a Lancastrian man, the Lancastrian man dying, and then the woman marrying a knight. The other one would be Henry VI's own mother, marrying a Welsh guy called Owen Tudor.
Oh.
But that's a side note. Nothing could come of that marriage.
No.
Nothing would ever come of...
Tudor? What the fuck is that?
Who's heard of a
brand
Tudor?
Of bagel?
Watches? What the fuck is a Tudor?
Haven't heard of him.
Yeah. But that's a story for another day.
Hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, Elizabeth Woodville was not a good choice. They'd fought for the Lancasters before the Woodvilles. In fact, Warwick himself had captured Elizabeth's father and brother in a battle once. And she was a widow as well, with 2 children. And her first husband, John Grey, was also a Lancastrian knight who had died in battle. So there's ideas that maybe it was a part of reconciliation. I don't think it was.
So this reconciliation, would this have been between Edward and...
The Woodville
family.
Yeah, to bring them over to the York side.
So they were fairly... I mean, they were important enough.
I don't buy the
reconciliation theory.
buy the argument, because if he did want to reconcile a Lancastrian family,
I'm sure there would have been more
there were better
prominent
options.
Yeah.
There were Staffords around. He could have had...
Maybe it's giving Edward more credit than he's
He could have had the Duke of Buckingham's daughter and the Earl of Oxford's widow, both of whom were Lancastrians. There were better options available, so I think it was solely just because he was horny.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's... There's no historiographical explanation. It's just he was feeling it a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Elizabeth came from a big family, which caused more problems, because now that they were, the in-laws of the king, they were very important. They'd gone from nothing to being at the centre of English politics, to the point that this is a side story, don't need to talk about this too much, but in 1476, for example, the Republic of Venice decided that Elizabeth's brother Anthony, for some reason, was the rightful heir to the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
Average Venice
I have
moment.
no idea why.
The Doges of Venice clearly are on something.
They just thought, you know what, let's do this. But that's an aside. Anyway, she had a lot of siblings, and all of them now required good marriages, and that took up a lot of the English nobility and took them off the marriage market, which made enemies. So one example was the diabolical marriage of Elizabeth's 19-year-old brother John to the 65-year-old Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. People hated that match. They thought this is just blatant money grabbing.
Yeah, or Middle Ages tactic of hopefully she dies and I can grab her money.
Yeah. And no one hated it more than the Earl of Warwick. For not just because he had 2 daughters, Isabel and Anne, who he wanted to find good matches for, and they were all the good English noble husbands were flying off the shelves to the Woodvilles now. He couldn't find a good husband.
Because they were so important now.
Yeah.
Been propelled to fame.
Yeah. But there's also, for Warwick, the personal slight of the fact that he was negotiating the French match and then just got completely sidelined for this random lady in England. So
and I guess
he's personally offended by this match as well.
Yeah, because honour and prestige, I mean, that's gone down the toilet for him, I imagine.
Yeah, because the King of France wasn't best pleased when he heard that Edward was wasting his time. Neither was Rorik. He was like, right, why am I here?
The Robb Stark parallels are looking a bit more.
Yeah.
I guess you could say Stark.
Yeah, the Stark parallel. Yay.
Hey.
So yeah, Warwick isn't happy, and he decides to do something about it peacefully first. And he first offers his eldest daughter, Isabel, to George, the Duke of Clarence, and says, would you like to marry her? Because the earldom of Warwick was one that could be inherited by women if there was no son.
Which I imagine at the time was probably quite unusual.
Yeah, there was some here and there, but yeah.
Wasn't the norm.
Yeah, but there was no son. So if George married Isabel, he was pretty much guaranteed to inherit Warwick and Salisbury, which would make him incredibly powerful.
That doesn't sound like too bad a deal.
Yeah. Problem is, Edward didn't like that idea, because he was also trying to build up more support with other people. He had the Herberts in Wales, got the Woodvilles, obviously. There were a couple of other families. He didn't want to have Richard, the Earl of Warwick, being so powerful, and he didn't want him being so closely related to the royal family. So he declined the match on George's behalf, which just made Warwick and Clarence sad and angry to the point of rebellion. Dun dun dun! Yes, so they rebelled. They were not happy with this.
That is not good. So these are 2 sort of former allies of Edward who are just not pleased with his antics.
No. So they decide to finance a rebellion in the north, sponsored with the figurehead called Robin of Reedsdale.
Robin of Reedsdale.
Do you remember that Robin Hood link?
Oh yeah, I sure do.
It's all coming together, baby.
It's all coming together.
Yeah, but they gave him that name and said, look at this, we've got awful advisors like the Woodvilles. Here we are, we're championing the rights of the innocent, which happened to be the Earl of Warwick somehow. But he's like, Robin of Reedsdale is Warwick's Robin Hood. It's a poor comparison, but that's what they were trying to get across. And this rebellion culminated in the Battle of Edgecote.
Oh, the Battle of Edgecote.
24th of July, 1469. It's a disaster. Warwick captures Edward IV. Terrible, terrible stuff. And puts him in Middleham Castle, I believe. Imprisons him there for a bit. But, Warwick's not a royal. He tries to rule on his own. He fails. He tries to have
Doesn't
George...
have the legitimacy.
No, he tries to have George go as de facto king, since he's Edward's heir. Edward doesn't have a son yet, so George is the heir.
So how old is George at this point?
George was born in 1449. So when are we talking about? So he's 20.
So he's about 20, okay.
About 20 years old. Our age.
Our age, yeah.
Nice. What a lad.
Parallels.
What a guy.
What a dude.
Aren't you in the right mindset to rebel against your brother?
If I had one.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. But even then, George is the heir and not the actual king. No one accepts this coup, really. So Warwick and Clarence are forced to let Edward out, which leads to a rather uneasy peace, as you can imagine.
So what happens then to Warwick
at the
and
moment,
his old buddy?
At the moment, nothing.
Nothing?
They sort of, say, oh, it's okay, we're all friends. But obviously, for the next few months, things aren't happy. But in the royal court, no one trusts Warwick or Clarence, and they don't trust anyone else. and they're still the most powerful noblemen in England, so it's a problem.
So there is now tension within, or rather between, former allies.
Yes.
Oh dear.
Now, they weren't done rebelling.
They weren't done.
They started another one in early 1470. This one went less well for Warwick and Clarence. They ended up having to flee to France.
Oh dear.
Yeah, they got kicked out. They left in March 1470, and they got to France. And then they went to a place, I think for the meeting that happened, it's fitting that the place they went was called Angers. Because by now the Lancastrians had moved to France, including Margaret of Anjou, who was French, and then they met at Angers. And I can imagine there was probably quite a lot of anger when they met.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because Warwick would have blamed Margaret for the death of his father. Margaret blamed Warwick for deposing her husband and disinheriting her son.
That whole thing.
Yeah, but King Louis XI, who was no longer a fan of Edward whatsoever, brought Warwick and Margaret together and told them to make peace because, we can have an alliance here.
The Love Davy too.
Yes, and nice. And we can start an anti-Edward IV coalition here.
Oh, shit.
So they do. They decide to have Edward of Westminster marry Warwick's second daughter, Anne, and they decide to, invade and put Henry VI back on the throne because he's still alive in the Tower of London. They agree that George, the Duke of Clarence, would be made Duke of York instead. That's essentially the deal. Other than they also say Warwick will be regent for Edward of Westminster if Henry VI dies while he's still a child. So it's quite an important arrangement. And they get their armies together and they come over in September 1470, and then things kick off.
Things kick off.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen.
They land in Dartmouth and Plymouth, down in the far south. Edward IV starts moving his men south, but now Warwick's brother, John Neville, is still up north, and he's not happy anymore with Edward, because he was made Earl of Northumberland for a bit, but then he got demoted to the Marquess of Montagu, and he just wasn't happy with that. So now he rebels as well, and he gathers an army in the north, and then he's trapped. Edward's trapped.
That is
between
not good.
the rebels in the south and
The
the
Hot
rebels in the
Prince
north.
is
The Hot
in
Prince
danger.
is stuck. Yeah, that's not a great situation for him. So what does he do? In October, he flees. He leaves England behind, and he goes to Burgundy. Henry VI is let out of the Tower. He's put back on the throne. The Lancastrians are back, but it's not over yet for Edward.
There's more to come.
Because the Duke of Burgundy is married to Edward's sister, so there's an alliance to be had.
Ooh.
There's family vengeance to come, and that is where we leave you now.
So, by this stage, it's just not going well for Edward.
No.
He's
back to where he was 9 years ago.
So, George R.R. Martin was definitely onto something when he thought this would be a good source of inspiration for a character in a fantasy series.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is just rife of inspiration.
Yeah.
If I was to say you had a cruel prince wandering around in these days who met two rebel knights as a child and decided to have them both executed, you'd say that sounds awfully like Joffrey, wouldn't you?
I would.
That's Edward of Westminster.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Insane.
He was and his mother, a woman who was pretty disliked for ruling cruelly and on behalf of Yeah, not popular there either.
Not popular.
Allegations of illegitimacy for that
Cersei
cruel son.
Lannister.
Yeah. Isn't it one? What if there was to say?
What if
someone with royal blood, like Daenerys, living abroad, in exile from their home kingdom? What if there was a guy, not a woman in this case, a guy, and he happened to be called Henry as well, and he was living in France at the same time? And what if I told you he was the grandson of Owen Tudor and Henry VI's mother?
Oh, no way.
The pre-mentioned marriage of that whole system going on there.
This is definitely laying the groundwork for something big.
What if I was to say Henry Tudor is still about?
History is unfolding.
He is Daenerys. He's our Daenerys.
He is our Daenerys. The Daenerys.
Ah, Danny. Ah, Danny. You're my king.
I don't want
I
it.
don't want it. You're my king.
want it.
You're my king, Henry.
So
This is a great episode.
it is.
Yeah.
By 1470, everything has gone shit for Edward.
Yes.
He has made some pretty stupid choices when it comes to his marriage, which has had pretty profound effects on his domestic scene. It's made Warwick and Clarence not particularly happy with him.
At all.
No.
Yeah.
Couple of failed rebellions here and there. Third one, invasion from France. Rebellion in the north. Not looking good for him.
Yeah. But he'd made some good decisions, because he does now have the potential for an alliance with Burgundy, since he's got his sister Margaret married to Duke Charles the Bold. Maybe they can do something with that.
Maybe he can do something.
The Low Countries are awfully rich. They got plenty of ships.
Indeed.
And England's only one sea
A lot
away.
of commerce. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, folks, is where we leave you.
Wow.
This episode of the Ripples of History.
I don't want it to end.
I don't want it to end. If you managed to make it this far, thank you so much for watching. Do leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe to stay up to date. As ever, I've been Iravic, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.